no Spurs activity again tonight, and I think all of us needed a little bit of a breath. I needed a little bit of time away from the hardwood. I'd spent a lot of time in front of the tube, bleary-eyed, watching some fine basketball. And the Spurs, you know, they're ending the season with kind of not a bang, but looking different. I'm not going to say better, but different because of the two things that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. We've seen a team with Wemby and without Wemby, and both of them have looked pretty good, but the team with both together, not so much. And it's one of those confounding problems that I hate going into the offseason having to deal with because I don't have a big enough sample size to kind of figure out why these two things are happening.
So I don't know that we have to figure it out, right? It isn't super pressing. Like, does it really matter in the long run? You know, that we don't know why
it does. You're right. I mean, there's time to figure it out, but the existential thing here is we have got to speed the clock. I think we're the timeline has been shortened by at least a year. I think what we thought we would need to do 2 years from now, and now we need to do next year. And likewise. So if it's fast forwarded, because Wemby's progress has been so much faster than I think most expected, decisions that we thought we got to put off, I don't think you get to put off anymore. So if there is even a question of can these guys work it out, I don't want to go into the offseason thinking that. I'd like to know after 82 games that I think after given find a way to play. Well, right now, I don't feel any better about that than I did back in October.
Well, let me ask you this. What do you know? If you have to come up with 3 undeniable truths about the Spurs right now.
Okay. Great question. I think that is the question that I hope Brian Wright contemplates every morning when his alarm goes off. What do I know? I know that Victor Wembanyama is such a transitional figure that what he initially wanted, I kind of winked at and said, yeah, you're going to figure it out, that we know what we're doing. No, when Wemby is at his best, when this team is thriving, is when he is truly the centerpiece of attention. We're not waiting for him to get the ball. He's already got the ball. He's grabbing it off the offensive boards. He's starting the offense. He's getting it across court 40, 60% of the time, somewhere about half the time, that he is the ball-dominant dude. He brings it up. He makes the entry pass. He gets it back. He scored. And I think that is what we figured out. And that means we don't need Devin Vassell. We don't need Keldon Johnson, at least in this iteration, given where we are.
The things you know, let's keep them organized.
Right, okay.
You know,
so what I'm saying is
expand. So,
his game is expanded beyond what we expected him to be able to do as far as handling the ball. Pop saw it. Well, I just didn't believe it. So I know that some of the things that I didn't think I was going to need, I'm going to need. And some of the things I thought I had, I don't need.
That's number one. That's basically number one.
Right.
Some of the things that I didn't think I need, I do. Some of the things that I thought I need, I don't. Okay.
Right.
Boom. Wrap it up. Off the assembly line. Thing number 2 that you know.
Number 2, I know that this team is bereft of shooting. That the effectiveness of what Wemby is going to be incumbent upon our ability to surround him with guys that will space the floor. And the more floor spacers we get, the better we'll be, because right now we don't got them. That's 2. 3, I know that we do not have either a legitimate NBA point guard or a legitimate NBA 5. But that goes back to number 1. Some of the things I thought I needed, I don't need. And some of the things I don't need, I think I need. So that goes to number 3. But I will say, as an absolute, I know that I do not have a starting power center, whether we call him a big 4 or a 5, and I don't have a point guard that will carry the load on a consistent basis. I got one. I like Trey, but I don't have one that I can trust on a day in and day out basis to start the game and be the dude. Those are the 3 things that after 75 games, I know.
First of all, finding out this morning that you're a Sith because you deal in absolutes. So
I do.
Wow.
I have a lot of metachlorians. Man, I'm a geek.
So I think the most difficult thing to grapple with is number 1, as evidenced by the fact that you couldn't just keep it in a box. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that being said, I think the most difficult decision that has to be made is is Wemby a 1 or is Wemby a 5? Or is he a 1 who has 5 abilities, or is he a 5 who has 1 abilities? You have to pick one of those things because he simply cannot be both simultaneously. I mean, again, he can be one that floats, but he cannot. You have to devote energy and resources to the other, even if Wemby fills that need and fills that void often. Now, is that Zach Edey, Rob's latest crush? Obviously, at your 5, I don't know. Is that a different Trey Young at your 1? I don't know. But you have to look at these different potential hypothetical amalgamations and say, what is the best one? What gives us the highest floor? Not necessarily the highest ceiling, because Wemby is the highest ceiling. Wemby will achieve that. And I think that I would, if I have to pick one of these paths, and again, I think the 4 paths are Wemby's a 1, Wemby's a 5, Wemby's primarily a 1 with 5 abilities, or primarily a 5 with 1 abilities. I prefer the path where he is primarily a 5 with 1 ability.
I agree with you, and I think the rest of the NBA world feels that's what he's going to be.
Because what he offers as a 1, and to keep these in really loose and simple archetypes here, is very easily findable. Not easily, but I mean, we can identify that, right? We can, go trade for Trae Young. Boom, problem solved. It's more difficult to answer who's your 5, who's your 7'5", big man dude who has a billion different blocks. I saw the other night, I think it was Spurs Red who tweeted this out. I'll double check this right now. I think Wemby has passed Bruce Bowen for blocks as a Spur.
Oh, is that all-time Spur?
Yeah.
I'm surprised a bit.
I'm about to double check this, but he was close the other night. So that's what I'm saying. Like that is the most valuable asset he provides. That's not to say that there aren't other valuable assets that he offers, or that's not even to say that there aren't even other extraordinarily valuable assets that he provides. But those other things we can find quickly in the modern NBA. So you have to pick one of those lanes to live in, though. And that's where, through 75 games, to your point, we've been figuring out that they're not living in any lane. They're just trying to learn and figure out and whatever, and it's a lost season in that respect. But you have to take a step forward here. You can no longer tread water.
And treading water, you define certain things, and getting past the 20 wins ain't going to happen.
Right.
I think if I'm Pop, I think it's a worthy chase. It gives my guys something to play for, to wake up every morning and go, well, at the very least, I don't want to be the worst. It might be the motivating factor, but as far as what we need to see, I think I would like to see Wemby run at least one more game, preferably at home, with those other dudes. But that's really all to kind of complete what my thought process is. But I think you reflected on what I'm thinking. I think that our love affair with a lot of these guys is going to be short-lived. That we will look back and say, the Keldon idea, he's going to be a lot like Lonnie. Like, well, he was fun while it lasted, but he was not going to be the guy. Devin looks like the most likely to hang around in long term, and Trey Jones, as long as he continues to do that. But everybody else, I don't think there's enough time to prove your worth, and I don't think that there's a bottom salary number that'll be worth keeping a lot of these guys around, because they'll be rookies and transient free agents that can offer more to what we're trying to put together, because I think we got a good picture of where we're headed. And at the end of the day, we can't shoot, but Victor has tightened his handles to the point where he can do a little bit more of than what he was doing. A lot of that Jeremy Sohan experiment appears to have been wasted. It should have been Victor doing all this stuff. They chose the wrong big.
I mean,
seriously, around the rest of the league, as teams start to collapse, you get Joel Embiid returning, and this kid Malachi Flynn set a record. You heard of him? I watched him for the first time. He's out of San Diego State, I believe, a couple of years ago. He's been on the Detroit team.
Yeah.
50 burger last night, and while that is not unique in the modern NBA, coming off the bench and getting 50 is. He's only the third guy to do it. He got 50 last night in a loss to the Atlanta Hawks. He joins Jamal Crawford and Nick Anderson as a bench players to ever get 50 coming off. This is since they've been tracking starting and bench scoring since 1970. Only 3 dudes have done it. Jamal did it with the Suns. He got 51 in a loss to the Mavericks in 2019. And Nick Anderson had 50 for the Magic in a win over the Nets back in 1993. It's the silly week in the NBA as the teams convince us, no, they're not tanking. We're just playing other dudes.
Right. No, I mean, good for him. This was one of those like, who? What? Like, who? I've never heard this guy for real. By the way, Wemby does have more blocks on the Spurs jersey than Bruce Bowen ever did, which is just unfathomable.
Speaking of his improvement, Ryan Russillo, noted basketball brain, he was the first to kind of jump on the Wemby is the Defensive Player of the Year award winner by his merits, taking away the team stats and just applying what he did as the award is as applied. He has some more to say about Wemby, and I continue to agree wholeheartedly. This is Ryan Russillo.
He's been better this year than I thought he would be because he's been ridiculous. Like whatever ceiling you had on him and going, okay, maybe it'll take a couple of years. Like he's already there now. This isn't the finished product clearly, but when you think of the hype and then the few players that ever surpassed that hype, like it's such a short list. LeBron surpassed all that hype. Tiger Woods surpassed all that hype. I think Ohtani, in a way, surpassed. Like, wait, is Ohtani really going to do all of these things? You're like, yeah, he did. And I know he's not going to pitch this year because he's hurt. But with Wembanyama, like, okay, I know that he's huge and I know that he moves well and I know the defense is going to be there. But I think it's something you pointed to. It's the way he's not just as a player, but as a person. Like he seems to get it immediately.
Yeah.
And that's not supposed to happen with somebody this young. Every quote, his demeanor during games, for the longest time, the Euro label of those guys being soft, I think it applied. Like I do all the draft stuff all the way going back 20 years. And you're like, I don't know about this guy. And with Wembanyama, I had Doug McDermott on, who was a teammate, he's obviously with the Pacers now. But I asked him, I go, what is it about him that surprised you? He goes, man, he is like up for it. The challenge in games. Some guy, the first time they're matched up with him, being like, all right, I'm going to push the skinny guy around. And Wembanyama's like, it doesn't matter. Like, you're not going to intimidate me. And to have this person be this good at basketball, but also this good at understanding the responsibility being the face of a franchise, there's no grade that's too high for him in what he's done his rookie year.
High praise from Ryan Russillo. I want to give credit. I don't know what the source was that. Edwin, will you give him?
The Herd.
It was. Oh, he was on the Herd. You couldn't have said it better. The clock is sped up. The timer is now. We got to leap past the first year. We're now in year 2 of what in the development stage for Wemby, and the praise for him getting it and all of that. The first time we said it about David, we go, man, he just gets it. And then the second time we said it about Tim, and man, he just gets it. And the third time we're saying it about Victor, he just gets it. At some point, maybe it's not the player, it's the system. At some point, can we give some credit? Now, I know that there's a certain amount of luck that these guys were all rather unique characters in that they've all gotten over themselves long before anybody else thought they would. But at some point, can we give Pop a little bit of credit? That you can't continually say, well, you just blundered into guys that got it. They got the guy that was available, and it helped that they were Tim, David, and Victor. But there is certainly some sauce that's being applied that they wouldn't have got other places that allowed them to be able to just get it.
There are very, very, very few times, if you are incredibly lucky, that this just dream of a person lands on your favorite team. And not just that they're incredibly good and incredibly talented, but that they kind of check and ride along with the vibe and the MO of the organization or the city or the, geographic area. I think Patrick Mahomes is kind of one of these examples, right? Like he really has embraced Kansas City or whatever. And for the most part, every Spurs superstar has done that. I mean, what we've had here is just it's different than even what the Patriots had. I mean, it gets obviously compared to that a lot, but it's a very different sort of thing in an adopted culture by the most important people associated with the organization. And that Wemby understands that at such a young age, is pretty remarkable, to be honest.
It is. Yet this is the third time we've said the same thing. Now, we can complain about steps, as Brian does on the Brigade Bar, that he says the only one that'll hold Victor back is Pop because of skipping steps. Well, what are the steps that fell into the Tim Duncan step? Well, Tim arrived on a team that was already in pretty good shape. They already had the next in David, who was still at a pretty high level, though winding down, and talent around him. There were other guys here. Sean Elliott was here. We had the dogs and Mario and Avery. We had pieces that were here already. These pieces aren't here for Victor, yet we're saying the same thing again. This guy, he just gets it. Well, the third time, I think we need to start giving a little love to the guy who has protected and coddled and carrot cake delivered and done all those little things to help these guys just get it, So with that in mind, the guy that just gets it, you're going to have to get him some help fast. And you can't help but start comparing the Spurs to the Texans. And you look at what the Texans have been doing, and it's fortune favors the bold, baby. Make the move while you can, because you don't know what next year holds. And if you're ahead of schedule, as CJ Stroud appears to be, you better act as if. And the Spurs, the clock is ticking, baby. The clock is ticking, because over the last 3 days, listen to what we have heard from guys that are traditionally kind of looking down their nose at San Antonio. Brian Windhorst and his socialist collective said, what, I just spent 3 days in San Antonio, and that place ain't what it was, bruh. I've lived in Miami, and it got that kind of vibe. Did you check the audio vault? So Wendy is telling all the other dudes, look at that San Antonio, because the place is set. It is not what it was. It is easier to get guys than it ever has been, and they got a bigger reason. So Wendy's telling everybody, San Antonio, you better be on the move. Ryan Russillo, it's obvious. He has been ridiculous, and he gets it. He's telling San Antonio, you better do something, because he is everything we thought he was going to be, and it's happening faster than we thought. So as the season winds down and we joke about bringing the Austin Spurs in to kind of surpass the worst record ever, man, there has got to be a lot of work done. We're watching the Houston Texans do it. It can be done. It's got to be done now.
It's one thing to be capable of building the plane as you're flying, which is what, to your point, we're seeing the Texans do in some respects. But it's an entirely different thing, and almost an entirely different skill, to be willing to do that, to be willing to deviate from your previous plan, to be willing to adjust and say, you know what, the way a year ago when this all began, we outlined the next 5 years and how we thought they would go. We have to change that.
Scrap it.
Isn't even always changing because he's better or worse or whatever, but it's changing because information changes. A year ago was a long time ago. The state of and the landscape of the Spurs and the NBA and whatever have changed significantly, even in under a year's time. So you have to be, again, not only capable, but more specifically willing to adjust, to adapt, to change. And if you are stuck on some plan and married to the idea that it has to be that way, then you've already lost. Then you've already ruined this, because it just simply it's never, ever, ever, ever going to be identical to the way it was during the first iteration of all this. It just isn't. It can't happen that way. You have to let go of that. You have to understand that fate smiled upon you, and you have to now go out in the sun. You've got a beautiful day outside. Go play. You know what I mean? Don't just sit in here and crunch your numbers the way you thought they were going to go, because it will not work out that way.
And in what has been termed by several general managers around the league as the worst draft in modern NBA history, here the Spurs sit. So if the difference between the number 1 player and the number 12 player, it ain't a whole lot. I mean, if the Spurs were going to have to lose a draft pick to Toronto, this was the year to lose it, because that pick really ain't going to mean much other than a body that might turn out. There really isn't that big of a change. But knowing that tells you free agency is going to matter. There's not a guy that you're going to be able to bring in that's going to help. And the shot of that was going to be slim anyway. Rookies just don't help that much, other than guys like Wemby. And even he didn't help in the win-loss column. Even Wemby didn't help in the win-loss column. So if that's the thing, if we're talking about speeding things up, your attitude about how you acquire talent has to change as well. Don't you need to start focusing a bit more on those that know? I saw on the Brigade Bar, Cougs say, it's different now because players came in like Duncan with 4 years of college experience and we're ready to set foot on an NBA court. I agree with that, but while everybody isn't college educated, by the same token, nobody is. So you walk in basically on the same playing field, because nobody's got 4 years of college, and those guys show up not ready to help. So the whole league's like that. So while it's changed, it's still equal. Getting guys to picks to help immediately matter. And while they don't have the college kids, you can go get a couple of free agents and make a big move now that will pay dividends sooner. I expect if the Spurs are reading the tea leaves, they're going to have to be a lot more active this summer than they planned on. I think they really planned on going through this year, getting better, and using those draft picks a year from now to really kind of catapult them. They don't have time. They really don't have time. And by the notion of the pundits, like Wendy, like Russillo, and others, everybody's telling them you don't have time.
You've got to adjust. You've got to adapt. You have to make the most out of it. You know, like the meat was ready off the grill sooner than you thought. You know what I mean? I know you planned everything. I know you have the sides and everything going on inside, but you got to be ready. You got to pull it. You don't just leave it on the grill so that your plan can work. You have to adjust. And if you waste this, I mean, history will not remember that kindly. If you waste this opportunity, if we go through the summer and you do not do anything significant, well, you're saying a lot about yourself at that particular point.
We had a Devontae Graham sighting the other night. You know, he kind of epitomizes the kind of guys that come and go around the NBA. You know, just enough talent to come out and help, but not enough to get in the game on a regular basis. And I don't think that the Devontae Grahams are anymore. On this bench, you either have to have starters or rookies or developers. There's no in between anymore. You can't afford to have more than one. You get one Malachi or Blake. You don't get two. You get one guy in development. You don't get to have two of those guys play. You don't get a Dominic Barlow and a Champagne anymore. You don't get to have two of those guys. You get one of them developing and one of them playing. And you don't get to have this long list of dudes that it's like bomb squads one night after the other. That's going to have to change.
Mm-hmm.
That we can't have that anymore. So just by that notion, the attrition is coming. And I don't think that we've seen a Spurs team change as radically as it's about to change, as we'll see coming up in the next, between now and the trade deadline next year. And I think the trade deadline next year might be the biggest shift in the roster that we'll ever see.
There's a comment from James on the Brigade Bar that says, you just said we are ahead of schedule. I don't know if you agree, Rob, but that's exactly what I was going to say. The Spurs are not ahead. The Spurs are behind. The pace has moved. This is like we're big Formula One fans. If you're the 20th car on the grid in a given race and the leader is behind you, you have to give way. You have to move over so that you cannot impact the position if you're getting lapped at that point in time. And I'm not saying that Wemby has lapped the Spurs, but Wemby individually is ahead of schedule, which by definition means the Spurs plan is way behind pace. So the Spurs have to now just, first of all, catch the pace that Wemby is on and then get ahead of him and build around him properly and, in an anticipatory sort of way.
They haven't done anything to be behind, but I do think that the schedule, the business plan is an organic thing. And hopefully they have organically changed the process as to when they go get the talent that's available, because there isn't that much time. And as much as we hear others talking about it, so do Wemby's folks. They hear it too. And as much as we want to brag about what San Antonio has become, at the end of the day, if he doesn't feel like he has the opportunity to win, we will start dealing with the very same things that we dealt with Kawhi. We'll start seeing it all over again, that this is not the place for me. I want to be someplace else, and how can I manufacture a way out? And it happens sooner in the NBA now than it ever has. And it'll happen at the end of your second year, beginning of your third, because that's the time the next contract is going to be up. He'll sign the deal, but then the pressure comes to move me with that signed deal. So the clock is ticking for what will be, by the end of next season, an all-NBA performer and defensive player of the year. That's what he'll be next year, and be worthy of all the media limelight, good or bad, that tells you've got to move. This is no long-term San Antonio. We are the monolith. We do it on our time. We're watching the Cowboys continue to do it and fail, and we're watching the Texans show how the modern world works.
I love the Texans.